Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today we're going back to 1958 and The Fearmakers, starring Dana Andrews, directed by Jacques Tourner. Now obviously Tourner is famous for his RKO black and white horror fantasy classics, like Cat People and I Walked with a Zombie. But obviously he did film noirs, obviously out of the past, or I prefer to call it Build My Gallows High. He also did westerns, so he did a bit of everything, even though he's obviously more famously associated with those RKO classics. This is a lovely little film. This is a Blu-ray from Kino Lorber, and this is part of the film noir Dark Side of Cinema Volume 7 box set. I think they're up to Volume 16 now. This is about Dana Andrews. I'm never really the biggest fan of Dana Andrews, to be honest. But he's always serviceable. Obviously, he and Tourney worked together on the classic Night of the Demon. So we get in the credit sequence, we see Andrews being tortured in a Chinese POW camp during the Korean War. So he comes back to Washington. He gets released from the military hospital. He's suffering from headaches and flashbacks. But he used to work in PR. He had a small company with his business partner, and he wants to maybe start that again. On the plane, he meets this professor or scientist who is trying to get people to, stop nuclear war. As he says, science and the military are unfortunately getting closer and closer together. But he drops a very strange line about the French architect who built Washington or designed Washington DC, designed it in circles, in a circular shape that makes the perfect target. But he gives Dana Andrews an address of a boarding house he can always stay in, if he needs to find a place to stay. But because this is 1958 and as a professor and as a scientist, you're automatically going, oh, he must be dodgy because he's a scientist, and all scientists in 1958 were dodgy. So Dana Andrews turns up at his old office, but there's some changes. It's much fancier. You do get the sense there's more money coming into the company, as Andrews has described it as just a two-man show pretty much. So he asks where his partner is, and as the kind of large cigar smoking character behind the desk is not his partner, and he's like, "Are you joking? Your partner died a year ago in a hit and run accident." And if you've seen enough film noirs, you know what a hit and run accident means. So obviously he's shocked, and he has one of his episodes and feeling faint, and apparently his partner sold the business to this character called McGinnis, played by Dick Ferran. Again, another film noir regular that you wouldn't necessarily recognise his name, but you recognise his face. The day before he died, in an accident, he sold the business, and now the business, instead of taking honest polls of people's views, maybe making stuff up to suit their clients' needs. We've never heard that before, have we? So Andrews is perturbed and goes to see his senator pal, because as we know, everybody's got a senator pal, and the senator is perturbed as well by the direction that Dane Andrews' company has taken, and wants Dane Andrews to go undercover essentially in his own company to check out what's going on. There's a wonderful moment where Andrews walks in on somebody giving a seminar in the office to a group of people, and the person's first line is, "So much for the Jews, now on to the unions," before Andrews leaves the room. So the film is essentially about the idea of bad lobbyists, if you could imagine. I mean, the thing is, it could have been made today, but Hollywood probably wouldn't actually make that film, because I think, for example, there's more kind of private healthcare lobbyists in Washington DC than there's actually people who work in Congress and senators. I think there's actually more lobbyists just for healthcare than there's actually politicians. And obviously the gun lobby's huge, the religious lobby's huge, the nuclear lobby's huge, obviously under the pseudonym Kaboom, the oil lobby under the pseudonym of Spill, as we know. So this is like a prescient film, which obviously in 1958 was perhaps quite naive, whereas sadly nowadays it's all about lobbyists and changing figures. Andrews has a nice little speech about, you say 90% of the people say this, but you only actually polled 5 people, and they were actually the people in the polling office anyway. They weren't actually people out on the street. So it's this idea that obviously people could get into power based on skewed polls and skewed facts. I mean, as if that could actually happen. As I say, in some ways it's a prescient film, but it's also quite depressing because obviously nothing's changed. It's only gotten worse. That's why, because people sometimes say, well, why do you watch films from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s? And it's because nothing's changed. We never learn. We're still, even though with advances in technology and, I can make this video and people in Canada and Finland and Japan and, can watch it, but we haven't learned basic lessons about human decency and, stopping war. It's sometimes naive when you see films, post Second World War, and they kind of say, well, war will never happen again because of this, and it's like, no, take a look around. So it has some dark moments in it. I mean, obviously, there's a secretary that works at the office, played by Mary Lee Errol, who, if you actually look, she didn't make that many films, who's obviously unhappy with the way things are going, and she thinks Dane Andrews is just going to join in, but then obviously she finds out that he's kind of undercover, and she gets involved. Mel Torme turns up as the kind of browbeaten assistant who does all the work, and he's got the bottle glasses, just to say that he's a nerd, and he's got a secret thing, or not so secret thing, for the secretary as well, and that becomes a plot point later on in the film. So there's a lot going on. You could argue, is it a noir? And it's like, well, it's about corruption, it's about a soldier coming back from the war and finding it difficult to find his place, so he gets caught up in something, and ends up investigating, because Dane Andrews' original plan was to go to California and sit on the beach and recuperate and try and get his head together, but obviously when he finds out his partner has been killed in an accident, obviously wants to hang about and help the senator. There's a nice little finale in front of the Lincoln Memorial, with the big needle in the background. I mean, there is a ridiculous shot of Dane Andrews kind of looking lovingly at the White House, but apart from that, it's just a wonderful little film. 85 minutes, that's the beauty of these films. They're generally always less than 90 minutes, and if you've got somebody like Tourney who knows what he's doing, they're just really well paced. Obviously sometimes film noirs can feel a bit rushed, but again, not when you're dealing with Tourney, who kind of knows what he's doing and knows how to pace things. Again, Dane Andrews is always a bit stiff. He does kind of open up a little bit later in the film, but again, he's playing somebody with PTSD before PTSD was a thing, so he occasionally has headaches, and which causes him to lose his focus at the worst possible moment, for plot purposes. But again, it's a really interesting film and prescient, sadly. He does go to the boarding house that the professor suggests, and that's a couple of bizarre characters as well. There's a lot of fun to be had in those scenes. So it's just a lovely little film that I would highly recommend, either if you're a Jacques Tourner completist or a Dane Andrews fan. This Kino Lorber, much in the history of Kino Lorber, sometimes you get lots of extras, sometimes you don't. This has an audio commentary by professor and film scholar Jason Ney, and it's got some more Dane Andrews on Kino Lorber trailers. So that's the Fearmakers from 1958 by Jacques Tourner, which is a lovely little film about political corruption, but obviously in America that kind of thing would never happen, because we've got people like Dane Andrews to snuff it out and stop it. So thanks so much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen the Fearmakers and what you think of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews in the future. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.